Yeah.
3. Welcome to Democrats Live. How's everybody doing? Dan Kildee, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right. Thanks,
Good to
Keith.
see you. You know, Dan, you and I, man, we've been in it for a day and a half, right?
We have.
In this, we're dealing with a piece of legislation called the Financial Choice Act, also known, more accurately known as
The Wrong Choice Act.
And we've been battling them. Congressman, tell me a little bit about you.
Well, I grew up in Flint, Michigan. Flint is my home. I'm from Flint, and Flint's in me.
Does that mean you're a Flintstone?
I'm a Flintstone.
Oh, there you go.
Born and bred. And, of course, a lot of folks know about Flint because of what's happened with the water crisis.
For sure.
But there's a whole story behind Flint. It was where General Motors was born there.
Mm-hmm.
It's where the UAW occupied the factories to get the first UAW contract. So it was a place that not only put the world on wheels, but made a big contribution to creating the middle class in this country through the labor movement. And, of course, the sad history is that recently it's been a community that's lost half of its population, has really been struggling, increasingly poor, not connecting to the new economy like so many older cities, particularly communities of color. And then on top of that, the state government poisoned the city with really stupid choices made to save money and ended up with lead in the water. And the people there are paying a huge price for that. So I love my hometown, and it's a place that still has a lot of hope and belief in itself, but it's a victim of really bad policy that Republicans have been putting in place for decades, and now it's all coming home to roost. That's my home.
Well, you got a great home, and I just want to say welcome to Democrats Live. Welcome to everybody from Flint for watching Democrats Live. We want to welcome you. And I just want to let you know we're streaming at live.democrats.org, where people can also sign up and take action and even donate, which is something that we do around here. We want you to know that Democrats Live is the Democratic Party's direct communication to the grassroots of this party. The people all over this country who pour the cement, who drive the buses, who work hard every day, who teach the classes, who see the patients, the folks who making sure that we're responding to that crisis in Flint.
Right.
That is who we're talking to, the American people, the great American community. And so, again, going back to this issue of this bill that we're taking up, this is a bill that essentially is going to repeal the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. That piece of legislation is something that Congress passed in response to the 2008 Great Recession.
Right.
Now, prior to that, Dan, you were not in Congress yet.
No.
You were a county official.
Right.
And you saw this thing unfold on the ground. Is that right?
There's no doubt. I was the county treasurer back home. I was responsible for dealing with delinquent taxes, but that brought me into dealing with vacant property.
Right.
And so what we saw happen is that this community, like so many others that had already had some struggles, had the effect of the financial crisis make things so much worse. People losing their homes, not because they lost their jobs, or a lot of folks did lose them that way. A lot of people lost their homes because they were sold mortgage products using deceptive tactics,
right,
using mortgages that had all sorts of tricks built into them that caused people to not fully understand what was going to happen, have the interest rates go up really fast, have their payments double overnight.
Balloon payments.
And in that case, folks lost not just the house they live in, but they lost their life savings, because for a lot of folks, mostly for middle-class folks who realize that dream of home ownership, they have put everything they've ever earned. That's the evidence of their life savings,
right.
That home. That went away. And so for a place like Flint that was already having its struggles, to have another group of folks who maybe still were working, but just simply couldn't afford to make that mortgage payment because the product that was sold to them, that was a result of big banks trying to make short-term cash on the backs of folks who really didn't fully understand what was being sold them. Well, that's one of the ways that the crisis was precipitated, and one of the reasons that Dodd-Frank was put in place in the first place, to try to curtail those practices and have some protections for consumers. It's amazing, as you and I have witnessed
Right.
for the last day and a half, that the Republicans in Congress want to take back the protections that came in as a result of a crisis we just don't want to repeat. They don't seem to mind.
Well, you said earlier, that the folks of Flint and the folks of my hometown in Minneapolis and of course, before that, Detroit, are awesome. They're resilient. But we can't deny that when the foreclosure crisis hit, it hit hard.
Yeah.
Could you kind of lay out kind of what you saw as the treasurer, the county treasurer, just driving through Flint? What did it look like when this foreclosure crisis was just rolling out?
It was really tough. I mean, you'd go down a street, like the street that I grew up on, and you'd see a family home with all the belongings on the curb, folks being kicked out by the sheriff because they had lost the home through foreclosure. There's a lot of sadness that comes with that. There's economic loss that comes with that. And if it was just limited to the family that lost their house, it would be tragic enough.
Right.
But what we also know, of course, is that the effect of this crisis was to take away the value of all those surrounding properties. You take a single family home on a street in Flint or in Minneapolis or wherever it might be and turn that house from a family occupied home into an empty house.
And abandoned.
Everybody on that street has money stolen from them.
Right.
Because that value, the value of their home goes down. It's affected by what happens. The house right across the street has half of its value lost.
And these are the folks who've made every mortgage payment, who haven't missed.
They mow their lawn, they pay their taxes, they make their mortgage payment, they go to work every day. They had their value, their life savings essentially stolen from them. And folks got away with it.
Yeah,
they got away with it. So this wasn't some accident of history. This wasn't some storm. This was a calculation made by banking institutions that the short-term profits could be increased if they sold these people these exploding mortgages. And whatever happened in the neighborhoods, that's not their problem.
Not their problem. Well, so the deal was that they also did a lot of these by refis, too.
A lot through refis, for sure. They trick people into refis.
Hey, I had a lady in my district. Her name was Sharon Glover. She's a very sweet lady. She started out her life as a young adult as a nun. She met someone. She left the nun, that practice.
Convent, yeah.
The convent. And she fell in love. She got married and was with that man for many years until he died. Gleason Glover.
Well, you told her story in committee.
I did.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Glover is like everybody's mom in Minneapolis. She just wanted to make some repairs on the house. Mm-hmm. She's fixed income, and so somebody calls her. Oh, well, you can get money out real good. You own that whole house, no problem. What she didn't know is she got a little bit of money out of the house, but for the money she got out of the house, the payments doubled on her. The interest rates ramped up. And she just could not keep up. No one explained this to her. There was a lot of fast talking. She swears that she did not tell them that her income what was written on the piece of paper, and I believe her.
Yep.
And she found herself in foreclosure until the community got around her, fought back, and we ended up keeping her in her home. But Miss Glover, was just trying to make repairs to her home. She owned her home outright. And this refi put her in such a horrible state. And this goes to these 327s and 228s. These are these mortgages when you get a teaser rate for 2 years, then they ramp up. This is not explained. And the assumption was you could just refi after 2 or 3 years, right up until you couldn't.
Right.
And of course, you probably never should have anyway.
Right, and those mortgages, those second mortgages in many cases, were sold without people being told the full implication of what they were signing, because it was a teaser rate. It looked good at the front end. And interestingly enough, the Republicans in Congress just yesterday shot down an amendment that I offered to preserve the right of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is an agency created by Dodd-Frank.
Yeah, let's move into what we did.
To go after those institutions that use deceptive practices. Now get this, even if it's discovered that some lender took advantage of Ms. Glover,
Right.
even if it's determined that they use a deception,
Yeah, absolutely.
what the Republicans in Congress are trying to do right now is make sure that no one can use the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, for example, can't go into court to try to recover any money for Ms. Glover.
Yeah.
Now, why would they do that? Whose side are they on?
Well, I tell you, we passed Dodd-Frank, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau actually went out and fought for the Miss Glovers of this world, but also students,
Right.
also veterans, seniors, just regular folk, and they were able to pull back about $11.5 billion
With a B.
Yep. That had been basically ripped off
Yep.
from people who work hard every day.
And this is something created by Congress
Right.
to stand up for the American consumer
Right.
against these big institutions, against these big banks, so that we have to reel them in.
Sure.
And that's what part of what Dodd-Frank did, is to try to limit them from selling these exploding products to people. But we understood that you can't regulate every deception out of existence. So in order to offset that, and this was before I was there, you were there.
No, but you were on the ground watching
I was
it
on the
unfold.
ground watching it happen. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was created to be someone who has the authority to stand up for those consumers.
Like a cop on the beat.
Like a cop on the beat who will go to bat for them. And so the interesting thing about what this Wrong Choice Act would do, which again, it's in committee right now. I mean, we're going to go from here back to committee.
We're going back there.
It's in the committee right now. Not only do they take the constraints off the big banks and let them go back to selling any kind of a product they can get away with, but they also take the cop off the beat.
It's incredible.
They basically tie the hands of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to keep that organization from going after those folks, to standing up for consumers. I mean, it's bad economics, but fundamentally, this is immoral.
Well, it just kind of feels like what they're saying is they're not really concerned about what happens to the average American.
Well, whose side are they on?
Yeah, it's so true. So let me just say, so you and I have been sitting in committee arguing for the last couple of days. We're going back there right after Democrats Live. And can you talk about a few more features of what they're trying to do as they try to repeal the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act? What they're trying to, for example, not just get rid of the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, but also some of the things that sort of stop the big banks from failing and then dragging all the rest of us with them, right?
Right.
It's what they call prudential, prudential considerations.
Right. So, like one thing, for example, that they would do is eliminate the Volcker Rule, which prevents banks from essentially gambling with your money. They have to have a certain amount of capital that they hold, and they can't take deposits from Keith Ellison and invest for their own purposes somewhere else.
Yeah,
That'd be gone.
And the reason
that would be gone.
And they can't do it, or under the Volcker Rule, they can't do it because my money and your money, Dan, is insured by the federal government.
That's right.
So if they take my money
Yep.
and run a bet and lose,
Who pays?
who pays? Well, they say, well, the taxpayer.
You pay.
And we say they should pay.
Right.
So they have to use their own money to do these speculative investments, not our money.
Right.
And so that's another one of the things they want to get rid of as well.
And the other thing, of course, they want to get rid of a lot of the supervision, a lot of the regulation, which would have prevented the financial crisis if we had the extent of supervision, of regulation, basically of monitoring the practices of these banks. There's certain products they can't sell, but there's also a way to keep an eye on them. Now, we know that that there are probably some ways we could improve that.
No doubt.
And,
of course.
And we've been offering to the Republicans a chance to figure out how we make sure that those really small banks, like small credit unions and others, don't get caught up in regulations that were really intended for larger institutions. We're okay with coming up with common sense ways to do that. But the way the Republicans are going after that is essentially to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Take the cop off the beat, eliminate the kind of oversight and regulation that would keep a bank from not only risking the individual's assets, but risking the federal government's backing of those banks through the insurance that we provide. And it's not good economics, and it's just not a way to run a business.
Well, you were saying that we were offering ways to improve the Dodd-Frank bill, and for example, you offered an amendment to say no fraudulent mortgages.
Right.
They turned that away.
Right.
And I believe that one of our colleagues offered an amendment to say, I think Josh Gottheimer, to protect 9/11 responders from being fraudulently abused.
Because in this case,
they said no.
They said no because they viewed it. This is so interesting because they viewed it as a cynical political ploy because everything they see is about politics.
Right.
When the truth of the matter is, we know that a lot of these 9/11 heroes have been victimized because some of them got settlements, some of them got some resources that made them targets for unscrupulous individuals and organizations, institutions that would take advantage of them. All we were saying is if those individuals are taken advantage of, we ought to be able to have the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, go after those institutions. What they said, what the Republicans were saying is, let the local prosecutor do that.
Right.
Now, I was in local government for a long time.
Sure.
The kind of complicated case that has to be made against an institution that is victimizing people in all different parts of the country takes a lot of expertise and a lot of resource. I have a lot of faith in my friend David Layton, the Genesee County prosecutor, but he doesn't have the resources in his small office to spend a year, 2 years, 3 years making a complicated case against a banking institution that can hire more lawyers than work in county government itself. And so the idea of having the CFPB is to kind of equalize the playing field a little bit, to make sure that we've got somebody with expertise like Richard Cordray, with resources to make these complicated cases and go after these predatory institutions and hold them accountable. It can't be replicated by just saying, well, it's already against the law to rip people off. Let's just leave it, to the township chief of police to try to make this complicated case. That's insane. It doesn't make any sense at all.
So what are the values we're standing up for here? I mean, people often say to me as a deputy chair of the DNC, okay, you guys are criticizing Trump, you're criticizing Republicans, but what are you for? What do you say, Dan? What are we standing up for? Are we standing up for honesty, truth? Are we standing up for fairness in the economy? What are we standing for?
I mean, I think the things we believe in and that this policy that we've been pushing is really a reflection of is basic fairness.
Right.
I mean, at the bottom of it all, that's really what it comes down to. People don't mind the fact that some folks sometimes do better than others. But what they don't like is to feel like the system is rigged against them in favor of somebody else. And so one of the basic principles that Democrats have always stood for, and we try to translate that principle into policy, is fairness.
Right.
That no matter who you are, no matter how big your pocketbook is, you ought to be able to go into any kind of a transaction, buying a house, borrowing money to go to college, whatever it is, with the knowledge that you're not going to get ripped off. And if you do, it's not going to be you against some 20-story building full of lawyers, that you're going to have somebody standing with you. Now, that translates to all different aspects of public policy.
Sure.
But when it comes to this question of how the financial industry works, if we start with the idea that fairness is a principle that we ought to adhere to, and we make policy that ensures that, we're going to be okay. I
think we'll be okay. Let me just remind everybody, hey, you're watching Democrats Live. Democrats Live, you can go to to live.democrats.org, and you can sign up to get involved, to do something about this, to help protect financial security for Americans. And, of course, you can donate as well. Dan, we're talking about protecting consumer protection. We're talking about the financial well-being of American families and making sure that the playing field is level for everybody. But the Consumer Financial Products Bureau and the Wall Street Reform Act, that's not the only thing that's on the table for repeal nowadays.
They're into the repeal and replace mode.
They're kind of into that these days. Well, we got some news this afternoon, right?
Looks like tomorrow there's going to be a vote on the Republican on Trump Care.
Trump Care.
Let's just call it what it is.
Is what it is.
It's Trump Care. And this will take away all the progress and the promise of the Affordable Care Act, what we call Obamacare.
And let me just say this. For folks who are wondering, well, what are Democrats for? We're for being able to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
We're for being able
sick,
we're for not going to bankruptcy if you get sick. We're for people being able to get a doctor if they have a pre-existing condition.
Right.
You know, we are for the simple idea that it's just common and decent that healthcare is a core right of every person, and that's really what we're for now. So it was interesting. I remember, of course, you remember well. A few days ago, really, the Republicans couldn't even get their act together enough to even have a vote in the House.
Right.
So they pulled the bill.
Right.
And that was an interesting day. What really blows my mind is that then they went back because they wanted to get more Republicans for the Freedom Caucus. Stripping 24 million people off health care was still too nice.
Right.
So they had to make it a little meaner to appeal to them. They threw some money in a high-risk pool, and now apparently today they came up with their number to be able to put it up for a vote, and there's going to be a vote tomorrow.
And the whole point of that, they're really trying to just get this off their plate.
Right.
The idea is really not about health care.
Sure.
I mean, we ought to just start with that premise.
Let's just start there.
This is a tax cut disguised as a health care bill.
Right.
And so who's the beneficiary of this? It's not folks who are sick, not people with pre-existing conditions, not families that are trying to just sort of take care of things, or even not some small entrepreneur who has a great idea but might be unwilling to risk their savings to grow a small business because they're afraid that they might get sick, and then it all goes away. What they're really concerned with is giving a massive tax break to the people at the very top. I mean, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, was funded in a way that made sure that the folks who had more contributed a little bit more to make sure that folks who are struggling are going to be able to have health care.
Right.
I mean, that's just the way it works.
That's how it works.
And that's part of the social contract that we've all entered into. And most folks think that's all right. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know about you. I haven't had a lot of people knocking down the door saying, let's not make that commitment.
Right.
That everybody ought to be able to get health care.
This is a core idea of living in a society.
But what has been concluded is that the folks at the very top, they're going to be okay anyway because they can buy their own health insurance. They don't even have to have health insurance. They can probably just pay the doctor bill, pay the hospital bill.
And of course, we know they do have great insurance and tend to.
Right.
But, after they repeal the Affordable Care Act, they're going to come forth with this piece of legislation, which I think you're accurately describing as basically a big tax cut, which has the wrapping paper of healthcare reform on it. I mean, and then what are we going to have next? I mean, they're talking about getting rid of this promise that if you have a pre-existing condition, you will be able to get affordable health care.
That guarantee, with their legislation, that guarantee is gone.
It's gone.
Now, they're trying to say that they preserve it, but what they're doing is saying that the states are going to have to make the determination as to how they want to execute that, how they want to handle this question, this guarantee of a pre-existing condition, create these so-called high-risk pools, and then the federal government will provide for a brief period of time some financial support to the states that will underwrite the cost of health insurance for those people with pre-existing conditions, with high-cost conditions. But no, they don't have any analysis that says that the amount of money that they're going to provide is enough to cover everybody.
Well, it's almost guaranteed not to be enough.
It won't be enough.
It's about $8 billion that they're talking about now.
Yeah. And
we have 50 states.
Right.
And, look, there's no way that, there's people with cancer in every state. Right. There's people with expensive illnesses and chronic illnesses in every state who need chemo, who need all types of care, high-risk pregnancy.
So the interesting thing is, why wouldn't, if they're going to take this approach that you need a high-risk pool to cover the costs of people with pre-existing conditions, why would you do it on a state basis? Why wouldn't they just say, look, we're going to make the guarantee and we're going to structure health insurance so that folks with the pre-existing condition will draw from the high-risk pool, which we will fully capitalize at the federal level, and we'll make sure that it's available to everyone, no matter what state you live in. You know why they won't do that? Mm-hmm. Because when this blows up and when there's not enough money, members of Congress who voted for it, you think they're going to take responsibility for the fact that folks with cancer, with diabetes, with multiple sclerosis, with Alzheimer's can't get coverage? No, you know what they'll say? Call the governor of Minnesota.
That's right.
Because this is a state issue.
It's not on my watch.
It's state administered. The state manages this.
That's right.
So they're just trying to move this off their plate in the name of this sort of phony principle that everything should devolve to the states. It's because they really don't want to step up and do their job. They want to tell folks that they're going to guarantee pre-existing conditions until you have one.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, I think that Americans need to know about this. We're talking about critical issues right here. We're talking about, on the one hand, financial security, protection from greedy lenders,
right,
payday lenders, and all the rest. And on the other hand, we're talking about your core health care.
Right.
And, Dan, I wonder if you have had the experience of having constituents kind of corner you off and just say, let me tell you, man, if the Affordable Care Act saved my life. I mean, how many times have we heard these stories? I call them healthcare nightmares. There was once a friend of mine who was about 38 years old. She had a son who was about 15 and a kid who was younger than that. She had been divorced and she was sort of on her own. She got child support, and she was a feisty, fearsome woman who was just like, hey, I can do this. But she looked me at, one day we were doing a healthcare community meeting, and she helped organize it. After everybody left, she looked me in the eye and she said, you come here. And I knew I better just get my butt on over there. She was going to tell me something heavy. And she said, let me tell you, my mom died of breast cancer at the age of 50. Her sister died of breast cancer at the age of 50. She said to me, I cannot to die because I got these kids to raise. That's what she said to me. Yeah. She didn't say I can't die because I don't want to die. She said I got people depending upon me. I can't check out. She said, look, do I need to go get a double mastectomy? Because if I don't, the Republicans might repeal health care, and then I won't be able to. Now, she said, I'm asymptomatic now, but it's in my family. Should I do this? And I said, hon, I don't know what we're going to fight. We're going to give it all we got. We're going to fight. We're going to fight. We're not going to quit. And we're not going to back down. Yeah. But yet this is what she goes to bed having to worry about every night.
Yeah, nobody in the richest country on the face of the earth, at the richest moment in its history,
that's right,
should ever have to make that choice. And here, the thing that's most sad about it is that it's a falsehood for some of our colleagues who are trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It's a falsehood, even if they want to ignore the plight of these individuals. And I hear those stories too.
I know you do.
Read the letters from people who write to my office thanking my staff who do a great job for helping them kind of figure this stuff out. But it's a falsehood for these Republicans to somehow pretend that they're saving anybody any money by not making sure that everybody out there, all of you, have access to affordable health care. Because sooner or later, we all pay. Like a lot of the costs, if we don't provide universal access, the costs get shifted to people who have coverage. Where do you think most of that coverage is paid for? paid for by the federal government through Medicare.
Right.
And so all these costs that a hospital or another provider has to absorb somehow for folks who have diabetes and who don't get their insulin, don't get their preventive care, don't get their nutritional support, don't get all that, who end up in shock, who end up in a emergency room.
Right. The most expensive care.
The most expensive care, which according to the basic principles that we adhere to, will be provided to them because that hospital is going to provide that coverage. They're going to provide that care. That cost goes uncompensated.
Right.
And so the cost that is passed on to all those third parties, private insurers, Medicare, Medicaid, that's us.
That's us.
And so it's a falsehood to say that we all don't pay. We all do support one another's health care one way or another, whether we want to know it or not. The question is, how do we organize that? How do we structure that economy around health care so that we simultaneously maximize the financial efficiency and maximize the health outcomes?
Right.
They're not in competition with one another. They're actually complementary to one another.
Absolutely. I mean, as a matter of fact, one of the things the Affordable Care Act is trying to do, teamed care and really reward healthcare providers for good outcomes and healthy people rather than just doing a bunch of procedures. In fact, doing a bunch of tests and procedures may or may not make you healthier, but if they say, look, my job is to get you healthy,
right,
and we'll compensate you for doing that, that's a better way of doing healthcare. And it's a more efficient way. And I tell you, as a county official, you probably had to spend time thinking about how all the old way before the Affordable Care Act impacted the county hospital, uncompensated care.
We did.
Yeah.
In fact, it's one of the things I'm really proud of. We created something called the Genesee Health Plan, which was in many ways an effort to say, look, instead of paying hospitals, because county governments in Michigan pay hospitals for their uncompensated care. I was the county treasurer. I was the head of county government for quite a while.
Right.
We said, let's not do that. Let's restructure that money and buy a bunch of folk who don't have health insurance.
Yeah.
And it really proved to be a game changer. This was 20 years ago. We proved the notion that if you invest in people getting access to preventive care, you save the cost of that catastrophic care that they end up needing.
You pay in the beginning or you pay at the end.
You're going to pay one way or the other.
You're going to pay one way or another. And it's cheaper in the beginning, just like everything,
cheaper,
right?
And
better outcome.
Human misery is avoided.
Absolutely. So look, what can people do? Let's talk about that. I mean, here we're thinking about protecting people's right to economic security and health security. Yep. What can we do? I mean, we all know, and everybody knows, that Republicans are in the majority in the House, majority in the Senate, and the White House. Are we toast, or is there some action someone can take?
No, there's action, and we've seen the result of this. I mean, we may not win every battle, but the battles that we have won just in the last few months have been because people have spoken up.
Yeah.
And we live in a participatory democracy. If folks leave democracy to elections, they're missing 364 days of democracy.
Tell it, man.
And so the point here is people need to use their voices and speak up and tell their stories.
You mean people can write their members of Congress?
Write their members of Congress.
They can call.
Use social media.
Sure.
Do conventional letters to the editor or whatever they call them now, but using every vehicle. Social media is a particularly powerful tool.
It is.
To tell the story. And we know the most important thing that we can do when we're trying to win a policy fight, any kind of a battle, is define the conversation.
Yeah.
If the conversation becomes about the federal deficit, which obviously, these are issues we got to deal with, or about, something that is not central to the needs of working folk, then the conversation is going to take us to a different conclusion.
Well, we'll have you back to talk about Trump's tax plan, which is a budget buster if ever there was one.
That is.
Yeah. Hey, now let me tell you, man, Climate March, is this an example of people taking action?
Absolutely. You just think back how only a few years ago, maybe a decade ago, climate activists were considered sort of very thoughtful but very fringe members.
Tree huggers.
Tree huggers, sort of the extreme end of the political spectrum.
Sure.
That has changed.
It has shifted
Dramatically.
They made
and it's
it
because
central.
more and more folks are speaking up. And so what we saw with the climate march was not just folks who are interested in science, not just people who have more of a conventional approach to environmentalism, but people who are really just kind of concerned about the quality of life in their communities. And they know that we're sacrificing the quality of our lives, we're sacrificing what we leave for our kids when we are thinking short term. You know, all of this really comes down to short term versus longer term thinking.
That's right.
Profits for banks got us the financial crisis. Profits over longer term sustainability for those banks. Short term profits for people at the very top or insurance companies was the underpinning of what required us to do the Affordable Care Act. Short-term thinking about using the resources of this planet as if we are the last generation to ever occupy it is what we're up against.
What do we say? We didn't inherit the planet from our parents. We are borrowing it from our kids.
We are borrowing it from the future. There's no question. So, I mean, all this short-term thinking, which, you know, is infecting public policy debates, it plays out in lots of different ways. And the most significant one, of course, is our responsibility to future generations to not waste this planet while we are the stewards of this place.
Well, let me hit you with this question. This Benjamin from Alabama wants to know, there are barely any Democrats running in my area. What are we going to do to have more Democrats in local and state elections, particularly in places like Alabama?
You know, I think there's a couple things. One is that activate yourselves at the most local level of government. You know, run for school board, for example. There aren't a lot of issues that play themselves out in traditional partisan, that partisan dichotomy when you're running for a school board seat.
Sure.
But it's a place for folks to get involved. I got elected to my school board.
There you go.
I was 18 years old.
It
was
awesome.
A long time ago, Keith.
Yeah, man.
But,
me and you both, brother.
So there's a lot of ways for people to get engaged. And I think that activating at the local level, becoming sort of conditioned to become a citizen activist all the time, bringing your family and friends along with you. I think naturally when people are more educated about the process, even if it just starts at that very local level, they'll begin to see themselves in these state and national debates. And when they see themselves and their interests in that debate, then they're moved to act upon it. And I just think sometimes, especially those of us, we serve at the national level, and we get involved in these big national arguments. They're important. But we forget that democracy plays itself out on the local stage every single day.
That as well as anyone.
Yeah, I did a long time, 3 decades in local government before I got here. Didn't make me less progressive.
No.
Made me understand how policy really works.
And it maybe helped you understand how the average person who we represent is actually getting along out there. You know what it's like. They catch you in the grocery store. They catch you in the coffee shop. They catch you walking down the street, and they tell you what's going on with their lives.
Yeah. So that's step one. I think there's lots of different ways people can get involved. Their local party organization really does provide a vehicle.
I can tell you this, the Democratic Party state parties, like in Alabama and other states, they are a key vehicle for getting involved. Show up at that state party, that district party, come to that thing. That's a good.
Oh, yeah. And what's interesting about that, and I know you've seen this too, how quickly somebody who shows up for the first time can suddenly have a pretty strong voice.
Yeah.
If you have just some energy and a willingness to work, and you get involved in a local party organization, you can have a platform for your views pretty quickly. You don't have to stand in line very long if you're willing to roll up your sleeves and do a little bit of the work.
Well, you and I were talking about this earlier today. Angela from California wants to know, what are you going to do about the attack on class actions? Just like the attacks on unions, killing class actions releases the power of the wealthy on those with the least ability to fight back. What about class actions, man?
It's another attack on the ability, and we just saw this on the floor of the House just a week or two ago. It's an attack on our ability to do what gives us the greatest strength. And
Civil
as to
redress.
Band together.
Oh, yeah,
especially.
absolutely.
So the notion of a class action lawsuit is that there are many, many people being affected by the same egregious act.
That's right.
And they, by themselves, don't have the resources, or maybe their story isn't compelling enough to get any action. But by banding together with other people who have had the same experience, who, like in Flint, who were poisoned by the same state government.
Look at that.
They are filing class action lawsuits.
Sure.
They got a settlement of a class action lawsuit for $87 million to make sure that the pipes in Flint were fixed over a 3-year period. There's no way that could happen if one individual all by themselves, and then another, and then another,
and then the other side has all kind of resources to pile on your head.
This is all about making sure, whether it's through organized labor, where we band together, the Democratic Party, where we band together, or other ways that people whose voices by themselves, while righteous, are not big enough or loud enough to blow down these big walls that have been put up. A class action lawsuit or a labor union, these are the ways people can band together and basically come from this one principle. No matter how much money the other side has, there's always more of us than there are of them.
Yeah, the money versus the many, huh?
That's right.
So, Dan, let me just ask, Eddie G, we got a little more time, buddy?
Let's do 5 minutes.
All right.
We can do 5 more. So let me tell you, Anthony from Maryland, there are quite a few people who are convinced that the Democrats are just like the Republicans. What will you do to educate them that we are not their enemies, but indeed their friends of working people? That's a pretty good question.
Yeah, and that's a good question because I think he raises a good point. That's on us.
Yeah.
I think one of the mistakes that we have made as folks within the Democratic Party in public office or as a party organization that I know you're really working hard to correct is assuming that folks know all the battles and that they know that when it comes down to these core economic issues,
Sure.
that we stand with them. We have to do a better job of communicating that.
Well, that's why we're doing Democrats Live,
Yeah.
man, because, look, you and I are fighting off these guys trying to take away financial security with the Wall Street reform. We're fighting off these people trying to take away health care reform. We're pushing the key issues, and yet sometimes we're so busy fighting these issues, we don't turn around and explain to people what's going on.
That's true. And you and I probably have fell into this trap a little bit ourselves. We use these sort of technical terms. We talk about Dodd-Frank.
Right.
We talk
What
about,
is that?
So really what it comes down to.
Dodd-Frank, who's that guy?
Yeah, exactly. What it comes down to is if you think that average working folks ought to have somebody empowered by the government to stand up for them against the big banks,
Right.
then you're with the Democrats
Right.
on this question. If you think because you might have an illness, you shouldn't be disqualified from having any kind of a future, and you ought to essentially be bankrupted because you don't have a lot of wealth, you want to be for the Affordable Care Act, that's the Democrats. If you actually happen to believe that the banks ought to be able to do what they want to do and everybody else is kind of on their own, and too bad if somebody gets hurt, you're probably on the other side.
You're probably on the other side. If you believe that rich people don't have enough money, but poor people have too much money, maybe you're on the other side.
If you believe that it was predatory borrowers,
Right.
people who were greedy, who went into a bank and could figure out how to cheat the bank instead of the bank cheating them, you're probably on the other side.
If you believe that if you get sick and you don't have enough money to pay all your bills, that you should just turn over and croak or something, you might be on the other side.
And if you believe that the job creators are people who have more wealth than they know what to do with, and they just need more, you're probably on the other side. But if you believe that job creators are working families who make a living wage, who can then take those resources, contribute them to the economy, spend money to purchase goods and services, and create a virtuous cycle, then you're probably a Democrat.
If you believe that climate change is a hoax made up by the Chinese, then you might be on the other side. But if you believe that this is the only planet we got, we owe a future to our children, so we have to live in harmony with it and control CO2 emissions, maybe you're on our side.
And if you believe that Donald Trump is not releasing his taxes because he's under audit, I don't know if you're a Republican or a Democrat, but you're a fool.
that one ain't going to work. If you believe that Flynn, Miller, Gorky, all these people who've been in meetings with, Russian, spies and stuff and ambassadors don't have to come to Congress and explain exactly what they said, when they said it, and why they didn't disclose it. Yeah, maybe you're on the other side.
Yeah.
I don't know. But let me just tell you, man, it's been a real honor and a pleasure hanging out with you, Dan. You and I have been friends for a while now. And I just want to tell you that it's really a pleasure serving with you on the Financial Services Committee and in Congress. I want people to know you are the vice-ranking member of the Financial Services Committee, right?
The number 2 Democrat, I think.
Yeah, man. And you know what? And you're doing a great job.
I try hard.
And our fearless leader up there is Auntie Max.
She is great. Maxine Waters. She's becoming a real hero across the country.
Maxine is fearsome and does not back down. But look, we'll be back again, Dan. We need your perspective on all these things. Dan Kildee is fighting every single day, not just for Flint, not just for Michigan, but the whole country. This is Keith Ellison. This is Democrats Live. We want you to tune in next week when we're talking about veterans issues. We're going to be talking to some really, really hot speakers who got a lot of important things to say about our veterans. Get online and check us out at live.democrats.org. This is Democrats Live. Get involved, and we'll talk to you next time.